Welcome back, everyone, to Constructive Uncoupling, the podcast devoted to amicable divorces. I'm Judy Weigel, your host and amicable divorce expert. Why? Because that's what I do, amicable divorces. As you know from listening to this podcast, I find guests from a number of different areas. And I found an absolutely wonderful and unique guest today, Noam Raucher. Noam, welcome to the show.
It's a pleasure to be here, Judith. Thank you for having me.
So I met Noam on Instagram, where I am meeting some of the most wonderful people in the divorce profession, or people that actually have stories to tell from their own divorce. So Noam falls in both of those categories. Noam, interestingly, is a men's divorce coach. Now, all the divorce coaches I've had on the program have been women, and it seemed like, for the most part, Noam, women were the divorce coaches, and other women are the ones who wanted divorce coaching.
Yeah.
But men are a very underserved area in divorce, aren't they?
They are. They're very much so. I think, I wonder if some of that has to do with women naturally being inclined sometimes to helping professions. I was just talking about that with a friend. It seems to be all the Jewish women I meet on the dating scene are all therapists or social workers of some kind. And so I think, they're dedicated to helping professions. And it sounds like a natural kind of way a woman might gravitate into being a coach for other women who are going through divorce. And I think the reason why you see so few men is because men tend to isolate, actually. I think men actually isolate a lot when it comes to things that they're just dealing with. And divorce can be one of those central things where they maybe think about their self-worth. I know I certainly did. And they feel judged and they feel really awkward and weird, and it can be a confusing time. And I wouldn't be surprised if men primarily go inward and they get their lawyer, they do what they need to do, and then they kind of move on and wonder how often they reach out and how much help they really need and how much guidance they can really use to get through those moments with dignity and with grace and getting everything they want out of it, walking through it as whole as possible.
I agree with everything you said. And additionally, I think at least our society, if not others, looks at women as being the more nurturing gender and men not so much. But I have to tell you, in my mediations, it is surprising how nurturing some men are when we get to the co-parenting schedule. It was really nice to see.
Well, it's fascinating. I wonder if co-parenting puts you in this situation where, it's like if you all of a sudden maybe went blind, right, another sense of yours would heighten, right? Like your hearing might increase so you could kind of get the sense of what a room is like. And that's the sense that I kind of get that happens with co-parenting, is that you step back from a scenario where, you had someone else's muscles helping you get through things. And then you step back from that and your own muscles need to kick in. And I think men naturally have those nurturing traits. I don't think society overwhelmingly gives us an opportunity to really demonstrate those. I know that there have been opportunities for women to lean in and men thus to lean out and back into the home and demonstrate some of those things, but we're still not there. I know that the pandemic has also forced men to take on more nurturing roles as well, which is a real wonderful thing, especially since we've just had all this quality time with our kids just dropped in our laps. And it is really surprising to see that from men sometimes in circumstances where you would expect something different, right? There's a lot of emotion that goes into divorce. And I think our natural reaction is to get angry. And that brings out a different side. That's not, a nurturing side. No one is attracted to anger necessarily. People come running when you're sad, though. And, men, I think, are trying to tap into that. They're trying to tap into that nurturing side so that they can be the type of people they need to be for their kids in those circumstances when you have to co-parent.
I think you nailed it. And I am talking to more and more men who have actually said, from attorneys, colleagues of mine, to clients of mine, that the silver lining, and yes, everything has a silver lining, supposedly, but the silver lining of COVID was that there was a restructuring of the family and the time spent with the family move that restructuring forward. So I had a gentleman in the office on Saturday who said if it wasn't for COVID, I would not have reconnected with my children. He was a policeman. And so his lots of time spent on the job. The other thing that interested me about Noam when I was reading about him on Instagram, and then we talked, of course, before today, and that is that you are also a rabbi and an educator.
I am, yeah.
So this brings a lot of different layers to this discussion, but I really want to start with this one. You've been divorced recently.
Yes.
So you're experiencing this part of life like all of us. Can you share with us a little bit? And then you're a father of 2 children, 7 and 10, right?
That's right. Yep. 2 boys.
Okay. So can you share with us what that experience was like, the struggles you had, what you were proud that you did, what you would have changed looking back if you could, just to give people listening a little bit of help to get through their process right now?
I appreciate that. I have, I think, I don't know necessarily what it's the result of. It could be just layers of Jewish guilt and, Jewish neuroses about things. But I have kind of just, and maybe it'll, wear off also with time. This may be a longevity issue with it, but, I have a sense of failure towards my boys about it, towards my 2 sons about, the failure of the marriage, the fact that something that they cherished and invested in and put a lot of stock in and loved is no more for them. And that was an expectation that they had. And I see it, in the way that they act out. That certainly happens, in kind of the offhanded remarks that sometimes my eldest will make, which are totally natural. And they're a window into how he's feeling, which always, gets a follow-up. But I feel, a general sense of failure in that way as a parent, that makes me think seriously about the relationships that might come into my life in the future and how it will impact them. I'm sure every parent who is divorced and thinking about love or relationships in their life thinks carefully about how it will also impact their children. If they're not, they really should be, not only about themselves but how it impacts their children. But I'm also very proud of myself. I'm very proud of myself because despite that failure, I think I found ways to hold it together for the boys so that it didn't become an overwhelmingly tumultuous time for them. I feel like even with all the emotions I had swirling around, that it didn't become obvious for them, right? And that they didn't have like an impending sense of fear about something. Who knows, maybe they did pick up on something. I don't know. They can't articulate that right now. And they certainly didn't seem to articulate that when, before they knew, but.
No, this was 2 years ago, right?
Almost 2 years ago,
Almost 2 years
almost
ago.
2 years ago.
Okay, so they were 5 and 8.
Yes.
Okay.
I was very serious about wanting to be as painless as possible. I don't think there's any way it can't be painful. I know that my kids cried. I know that I cried when I was telling them, and that my ex cried as well, and that we came up with a real plan. I mean, I could supply you with the list of things that we had planned to say. I did research. I spoke with therapist friends. I spoke with my therapist.
Go ahead, share that.
Looked on. I mean, I if off the top of my head, I wish I had actually come with it, but I can surely share. But just in terms of reminding them and reminding them that everything was going to be okay, and that we were a family of a different type now, and that there were also, silver linings to this. It seems weird, but, when you're talking with kids, you do give them the whole picture of things, right? Because that gives them a sense of assurance. I know that we did it right because I know that our kids had a chance to emote. They had a chance to cry, and they asked for a chance to scream and throw pillows. And we allowed for all that because we wanted them to emote and get it all out. And then they did the typical kid thing, which is, they got distracted and on to the next thing, which is, what do you mean? I got a second room? More toys? And they cleaned up. Their grandparents showed up for them in spades. I don't think any kid has benefited as much as my kids had from divorce from their grandparents.
That's funny.
So they showed up, and Tamar and I also planned to do it on a Friday because Shabbat was a regular ritual for us in the household, and we wanted them to have some form of stability from the get-go, a way of saying that even though our family is changing, and this is a major change that's going to be really hard to wrap your head around, there is still stability It doesn't mean that we're all strangers. It doesn't mean that the family, is completely severed, right? And that you can't have those awesome feelings again. And so we did Shabbat as a way of stabilizing them, as providing them with a resource. It was actually really touching. My eldest son, Judah, said, I want to give a toast. I was really surprised that he was that able of articulating it. And he said, I want to give a toast. And he said that even though we're divorced, we're still a family. He was really, he never wanted to do that on a Shabbat before. And so it was actually it was, in the midst of the sadness about it and the pain I felt about hurting them in the process, it also became a wonderful moment to say, I think we're going to be okay. And that was really helpful. It was very helpful. It made talking about divorce and made dealing with divorce much more easy after that.
Isn't it amazing how prescient children are and how they can just get to the core, the essence of something very emotional? They're so pure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know. Is there anything you can share that you would have done differently that you really could only take a look at once you were through the whole divorce process?
It's hard for me to say that right now. I don't know that there's anything that I would do differently. I really don't. I think I need more time away from it to really get that perspective. I think there's certainly some things I could have done differently. I know that I tried to keep myself together as best as possible. I tried to, find hope wherever I could find hope, and to try to be patient and to know that it was going to be over at some point and that I was going to have to get through it. I went to the gym a lot. That helped out.
That's great. It
That
does,
helped.
doesn't it?
Yeah. And I relied on my friends a lot and my men's group a lot, which was really helpful. I mean, they just became wonderful vessels for me to pour all my crap out into. It was great.
Yes. And when did you decide to become a men's divorce coach? How long? Because, you've only been divorced a couple of years.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
when did that take place?
This has been a recent decision. I mean, I've been trying to, I love being a rabbi. I love doing the work of a rabbi. I want to get away from certain elements that, are just stressful. But there are a lot of things I love doing as a rabbi. But one of them is walking with people through difficult times. That's why I created my website, Walk With Me. It's under www.rabbirauscher.com, if I could throw that in there.
No, I was going to ask about that throughout this.
Sure, yeah. And I'll give you more information about that later. But
absolutely.
But I created it because as a rabbi and as an educator and as someone who has been through this experience and another of other experiences, I feel I've been able to gain a certain amount of perspective and wisdom through the help that I've gotten, through the guidance and the coaching that I've gotten. So much so now to the point at which I can help others. I've been in the pit. I've rolled up my sleeves and I know how to figure out the way out. And so, for me, what I'm trying to offer is for other men who are going through this out there, that they don't have to be isolated, that they don't have to be alone in the process, that they can have a friend in me, someone who's going to walk with them and guide them through so that they can get what they need out of this transition in life, so that they can get everything that they deserve out of this transition in life, and so that they don't have to do it alone. And that's what I'm trying to offer the world at this point. I have lots of wonderful gifts to offer, but this one is a real specific one that I think could be helpful to a lot of guys out there.
And you're not just offering this or working with people in the Jewish faith. This is anybody, or are you specializing?
Well, I certainly have a specialty in the Jewish faith. So if there are Jewish men out there who are particularly interested in how to walk through this with a Jewish lens, there are any number of values that can come and help us out in the process. And Judaism is very clear about, how divorce can go. If you're a stand-up guy, if you're understanding of what your role has been in things, you go along with it, right? This isn't uncontested. You're part of the process. You're part of this uncoupling. You're an active participant. And that's what you do. But I'm also offering my services, yes, out to men in general, because Judaism is only one particular track of it. There are lots of guys out there, and I can speak to all those guys regardless of the Jewish vocabulary that they might be interested in.
The the part of your story on Instagram that definitely drew me to you was because you also have a podcast.
Yeah.
And your podcast is
Yeah.
called The Jewish Divorce Project.
Yes.
That interested me because as a mediator and paralegal dealing with amicable divorces, I've been going to a yearly seminar in July called the Cultural Competency Workshop, put on by the Iranian Lawyers Association. And what
Wow.
they wanted to do, I know, interesting, right?
Yeah.
What they want to do, it's been going on, I think, 9 years. I've gone to 7 of the 9. Hugely beneficial. And what they want to point out are prejudices that any of us may have in the divorce business when it applies to various cultures. And I thought that was so important because we don't even know what our prejudices are half the time until we're faced with them. And then all of a sudden we're like, oh, shoot, did I just say that? Did I just think that? Did I just respond like that? Even judges, during lunchtime, it's a whole panel of judges, and they talk about what their prejudices are that they have to fight against when they're seeing people in their courts.
Yeah.
So I wanted to start doing a series on different religions and how different religions handle divorce. So when I saw the Jewish Divorce Project, I said, I got to call this guy. And the episode I think you just uploaded called Divorce Theology truly caught my eye, and I listened to it.
Thank you.
Can you please share now from the Jewish religion? Well, talk about that episode, Divorce Theology, because it is from the Jewish point of view.
Yeah.
But we can expand that outward. So go ahead, Noam.
Sure. So if I could also give a little bit of background to the podcast, it's actually really interesting because I've gotten probably just as many networking opportunities out of the dating scene as I have dates, which is really funny. Sometimes the dates don't work out, but you feel like you have a good professional connection with people. And certainly meeting therapists out there and being a coach of some kind or rabbi, it's a good professional connection to make. And Sheva was one of those. She and I met on Bumble. She was in Colorado for the summer and she cast a wide net looking to meet Jewish guys. And I was one of those Jewish guys. And she's a therapist actually based in Florida.
And your co-host.
And my co-host. That's exactly how it happened. She said, you're a rabbi and you're working to be a coach. Why don't we do a podcast together on Jewish divorce? So I said, great, let's do it. And we had a wonderful meeting, which was a little weird because it was like a first date kind of podcast meeting. We weren't sure then. And
mixing business and
pleasure. Business, right.
We do that in Southern California.
That's how it goes. But, it's all business. It's all business. That's what it is. It's just, there's no room for long distance relationships here. Give me a break. So
we're no longer geographically
that's
unfit.
Right.
Okay.
That's right. So, but she's back in Florida, and it's a wonderful friendship. It's a great project to work with her on. I'm so grateful that she dropped into my lap. It was really, it really is wonderful. And yeah, the most recent episode that we've done, episode 12, was on divorce theology. Sheva has a really wonderful way of just kind of dropping great, deep questions for us to consider. And so that was almost on the fly. In some ways, we had very little time to prep because we just weren't happy with the topic that we had originally picked. And it ended up being a really deep episode and very much in line, coincidentally, with the weekly selection that was being read in the Torah that week. Right, every week there's a different selection of the Torah that's read throughout the Jewish community, and that one there's a story of Jacob wrestling an angel. And what does it mean to wrestle with something? And so she and I were talking about wrestling with being divorced and going through a challenging moment and being in challenging moments. And what does it mean to be defined by challenging moments or not letting those moments define you? What do you call on in those moments? And one of the things we discussed was that, being an Israelite or being someone who wrestles with things, doesn't mean that you necessarily have to win, right? You can come out a little broken and bruised like Jacob does in the story, but you can also come out a new person entirely. You can come out with a new sense of self. And it could be just that it's not necessarily that you win or lose, but that you are capable of going through that moment, that you are able to go through that moment. And I think that's what's really important, because in the end of it, it's not about win-loss. It's about how you actually go through it all. And that was really inspiring. I think that's what matters for all of us. That you look back on, you say, how did I handle that?
Mm-hmm.
What did it say about me? What did it say about my character? And then that is wonderful. You know, you have a character bank account, you put it in there and you save it and you call on it for other times, because there are going to be other times where you're going to need to know that you can get through something like the pandemic. This thing is going on. We all hope that it's going to, I think we're all kind of like hoping it's going to dissipate maybe in the spring somehow. Like, this is a nasty spike,
I know.
but nobody really knows.
I know.
And I think we need to have this perspective of we can get through it. It's not about winning. It's not about losing. It's just about being able to get through it.
So when we were talking in our pre-interview, and I was getting to know you more, you were talking about the unique aspects of a Jewish divorce, not only within the Jewish culture, because Judaism is a culture and a religion, right? It's both.
Yeah.
And so you were talking about how people within the religion look at divorce,
Yeah.
and how that can affect
Yeah.
somebody who feels they must have a divorce. Can you speak about that a little bit?
Absolutely. Sheva and I spoke a lot about shame and the stigma that goes in the Jewish community. I think everyone who gets divorced faces a stigma. There are natural questions that people ask. Why didn't someone want to be with you? I think it's one of them. Like, answer that question, right? And what does it say about yourself? It's one-sided, but it leads people to think things. And certainly in the Jewish community, there is prejudice is one thing, just stigma is another. I know in the Jewish tradition, and Sheva talked about this, you know, in a much more modern way, but the idea that while divorce is something that happens, it's in the Bible, it's there, right? It's right in Deuteronomy. It speaks about it specifically. But
well, what does it say
but
about it?
nevertheless-
I really didn't know
see,
it was in it.
it's all legal,
Other
right?
than it's not legal.
There are. It's not only.
Well, I
that it's-
grew up Catholic, by the way.
to each their own, right? And each religion offers its response to it in its own way, and it's a reflection. But this is what it's legally provided for. That's one thing. But then there's the spiritual reconciliation of it, and Judaism reconciles it to be a tragedy. It talks about the altar where we make sacrifices to God, where we honor God. Even the altar cries. It's a piece of stone. I don't know how it cries, right, or cracks, because clearly the foundation of what it takes to worship God is marriage, which is total baloney. Okay, that's not what it's all. I mean, you think about, like, if you just deduce it all, right? If you reduce it all to what does it essentially say? It essentially says that you think that marriage is the primary engine which makes this holy endeavor work, and it's not. It's the individual experience and the individual's contribution and their potential in the world that makes for the holy experience. It's got nothing to do with marriage. I get it, though. Judaism is a very family-centric religion. Everything that happens in Judaism happens around a family paradigm. It's where values and wisdom get conveyed
It's
most
a religion
intimately.
and a culture.
That's exactly right.
Yes.
It's just what happens. And when you think about, oh my God, there's a breaking of what we think is the primary engine for conveying all these things, then of course you're going to think it's a tragedy. And that's what Sheva touched on, the idea that, like, you've broken something so essential to the community, right, that how can you possibly be a part of it now, and you're toxic in some way. And that's not true, right? It could be that, and it's been phrased before by other rabbis, that divorce is what we can say is a mitzvah, right? It's not only an obligation, right? Maybe your marriage just isn't working. It's not healthy. You need to get out of it for your sake and for your kids' sake, right? And that way it can be an obligation, a commandment, a thing you need to do, a necessary thing to do. But it could also be a good deed, which is how we translate mitzvah colloquially, right? That it could be a good deed, just something that's a nice thing to do. And that can be true as well, right? In the sense that it can be a healthy move for you in your life. If the way we're trying to keep people together in relationships is by saying that marriage is the holiest thing that you could possibly do, and it's the be all and end all to Jewish, life and living, I can't think of how many marriages might be failing as a result of that ridiculous pressure, right? That's just insane. It's not. Judaism does not exist for the sake of the marriage, and it does not exist, I would say, for the sake of the family. It exists for its own sense of usefulness to the individual and how it makes that individual's life better and has more meaning.
That is really, really well said. I'm divorced, I'm not Jewish, but all of a sudden it just felt like, oh my, what a freeing thought that is. And I can well imagine anybody in the middle of a divorce right now needs something like that, needs someone and something to say, it's actually okay.
Not only is it okay, maybe you should do it.
Right, because then I always thought, well, all right, everything in life is an experience. The only way I can accept life as being just and right is if life is defined as a set of learning lessons. And
That's
then
right.
Anything that comes your way is fine.
That's right.
And then you handle it the best you can.
That's
and
exactly
you learn
right.
from it, right?
That's exactly right. You're a soul having a human experience, right? You have to
Yeah.
learn how to figure that stuff out.
Right. And so then we go to the practical end of things and we look at, well, maybe you just made a really bad decision about marrying this person. Maybe you weren't where you needed to be, and the decision wasn't made in a healthy, proper way. So why carry this on?
Right. That's exactly right.
Of course, I even take that a step further, Noam, and I just say,
how do you take it further?
I think most people, or at least half the people who have kids, should not be having children. I don't.
That's true.
I don't think
that's
a
true.
lot of parents, because I sit in these mediations, and I listen to people's ideas of parenting, or they describe things that have happened in the home the previous week that they bring into the mediation, and I'm aghast.
Yeah.
Are you serious? You really think this is okay? No, we should tell the children exactly why we're getting divorced. And if they don't like you, mom or dad, because you're the one that really perpetrated this, it's the way it is. And I just can't imagine anything worse.
Well, and it also sounds very defensive, right? It sounds like you're trying to, kind of rally the troops around you in some way. And yeah, I think once you have kids, it changes the game entirely. It changes the game on life entirely. You either show up and you realize that you have kids, or you don't. And that doesn't mean that you have to be perfect. And that
which we aren't.
Right, and that you have to do it right all the time. I fail a lot, but the point is, I think, are you willing to show up and you're willing to do anything about it and learn from it? And I think that it speaks volumes. I think any parent that can go through divorce with some sense of self-respect and grace and with the mindset that I'm going to try to make this as painless as possible for my kids, that's saying a lot about that individual, because it's not easy.
Oh,
It's not, and you have to really care for yourself. And I think it's okay to put up to your defenses. And I think it's okay to feel all the feelings, whatever they're going to be, right? The full gamut of them, and to find some way to express them, right? So that you're going through this in a real healthy way. But I think any parent that goes through it and tries to do the best for their kids in the process, more power to them. I'm proud of them. It's not easy. It's really difficult to also parent and care for someone else while you're going through your own tragedy.
Hats off to everybody who does this. I can't imagine what it's like, because I did not have children when I was getting divorced. And now I don't remember one thing about that year.
And let's
filing. I don't.
And let's also be clear, it's a death, and it's a very different from a concrete death. For when someone actually dies, you're allowed to fall into your corner, right? And to have people come around you and hug you, and to go into your depressive states. You may need to be able to you may have to also parent along the way. There's no question about it, but there is more forgiveness that way. And again, the delay with divorce, right? If you're not telling your kids immediately because you're not in a position to do so, right? That means you're carrying that, like I said, around with you, right? And you're just waiting to finally tell them at the right place, but you're also dealing with your own crap at that same time. And so it's not easy to think about all those things at once and still parent gracefully. And if you can do it and still keep the kids in mind so that it's a healthy process for them, I think you're doing great.
I think you're doing a monumental task. I really, really do. I've talked a lot in the year and a half that I've had this podcast about the emotional divorce versus the legal divorce.
Yeah.
And I can always tell when somebody's already gone through the emotional divorce before they land in my office. They're just different. It's an easier conversation. It doesn't mean that something won't be said that will cause a little emotion, but the arguing isn't there.
Yeah.
Did you have an opportunity to go through the emotional divorce before you started filing?
No, no. I had to go through the emotional divorce while the whole thing was going on. And I think that's what makes it difficult, is that like
Very.
you're dealing with separation at two different times. I think the person who probably asks for the divorce goes through the emotional divorce way beforehand, and that's what gets them to the moment, right? They reconcile it to themselves, and the other person is just kind of sitting there with it.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And you have to wait till the other person catches up a little bit, I think,
Yeah.
if possible,
Yeah.
if you can do that. Sometimes
Yeah.
finances and other circumstances make it not possible. But if
Yeah.
possible, you have to allow your soon-to-be ex-spouse to have their time. Once you introduce, I would like to not be married.
Well, and let's also take a step back, right? Let's go back to the men's issue for a second, if we could.
Yeah.
Right? If my statistics are correct in understanding it, it's something like 80% of all divorces that happen in the United States are initiated by women.
I don't know this, but keep going.
And I want to say that with the caveat of I'm not entirely sure for anyone who's listening. That's what I think I heard. And if it's wrong, then I'll find some way of correcting it. I'll write you a letter or a note or something like that. But my point
we'll have you come back.
And I'll correct that. But my point is to say, let's just think about that from the conversation we're having of who's been emotionally ready for this, right? Mm-hmm. And also who is emotionally capable necessarily of handling it and ready to deal with that. If men, just by the simple logic, right, have been given somewhat of a short shrift in terms of emotional expressivity out there in the world, I don't even know if that's a word, but emotional expressivity, mm-hmm. right, out there in the world, in terms of it's being okay to express yourself and having outlets for expressing yourself and being taught to be emotionally articulate and aware of yourself and all those things. Think about that overwhelming surprise that men feel when when their wife asks them for a divorce, right? And then not necessarily being able to handle that, right? And then mm-hmm. needing to reconcile it while you're going through that. Let's just try to see it from their perspective and know that they're trying to, dot all the I's and cross all the T's in the middle of the process, right? While also dealing with their own emotional baggage and bullshit from all this, right? And how they're reconciling that emotionally. Those aren't easy things to do. Mm-mm. You can't do both those things at once.
True.
Right? And I wonder what that brings out in men. I wonder what it makes them look like. I've certainly heard a lot of unfortunate stories in the dating scene, right? From women who have had difficult times with their exes. And I try not to disparage those guys because I don't know them. I feel for them because I hear how it impacts their exposure to their children, right? How it impacts the relationship that they have with their ex and how that will ultimately, I think, impact the future of the relationship in some way. I'm not entirely sure. But my point is to say that that's a wholly other experience that someone is going through. And they're often hidden. And we may have a much clearer idea of what a woman goes through because a woman may take the action for a divorce first because there are more female divorce coaches out there because, I don't know, maybe women talk about divorce more so than men. But I think it is important to realize, since you bring up this idea of, emotional reconciliation in it, we have to think about whose emotional reconciliation is going on, right? And how one party may have already gone through their emotional reconciliation, the other is still going through it at that time, and that changes things. That I think gives you another thing to think about for that individual.
Could you please speak as a father and a single parent, divorced father, this notion that some women, not all, but some women will use the children as, I hate to use the word weapon because it's so adverse to me, but just want to keep the children away from the father, either as a punishment or, no, I can take care of them better than you can.
Well, I mean, it certainly is easy to use children as a device for getting what you want. I mean,
better word, device. Thank you.
Or a mechanism. Historically, men have been at a disadvantage when it comes to custody battles. I'm lucky in California that it's a no-fault state. Not to say that I caused anything that would specifically cause for the divorce, right? I think there were things that Tamar and I both brought to it that ultimately led to it. But
I think it's fabulous. California is a no-fault divorce. Oh my God, I couldn't imagine anything worse than having to prove why you should not be together with somebody.
That's exactly right. And I also think that, there are advantages to having 50-50 custody and all that stuff. I also think that, and I'm losing myself a little bit along the way, so I'm going to pause. But
but women who want to keep men away and scare them.
Yeah, and I think it is, if you're a woman and you're divorcing your husband, there's certain things that you want, right? There are certain ways to get them to give you what you want, because I think that, again, the court, when it comes to children, is in favor, right, of looking towards women as being the natural person to care for them. I don't like that, but
that could be one of the prejudices, by the way, that judges may have.
Yes, I think
still, depending on the judge and the age and culture of the judge.
It's not a guarantee that a father should get the children full custody. It's really not. And I wonder what society would look like if we actually did take an example of that. What would that look like? It'd be very interesting. But I know that the cards are necessarily stacked against guys when they go to court. You have to be very careful.
Did you experience that yourself?
No.
Or did you and your Tamar, right?
Yes.
Okay. Were you pretty good about the co-parenting schedule, working together on that?
I think despite my failings as a husband, I'm still a good father. I think Tamar recognized that as well, and she wasn't about to put her children in a circumstance where they couldn't see their dad. I have 2 boys as well. That sounds a little ridiculous to me. In a day and age where we're trying to grow healthier men, right? Divorce is one thing. I get that. Denying, kids access to their father simply because,
of something that happened in the marriage.
Right. And we all need our fathers, right? I would say even, girls need their fathers, right? But so denying children access to their fathers, right, is detrimental to their health. And she wasn't about to do that. And I think, her own circumstances.
Hats off to her on that.
Oh, I give her full credit for that. There's no question. There was, and that, admittedly, that was one of my fears at the very beginning, that at some point, not that I had done anything, but that I could lose my children. That was a big fear of mine, that I didn't know what it was going to be like with my boys. And I was very scared about that. Mm-hmm. And one of the first things she did to assure me was just to say, I'm not going to take them away, right? This is about, 50-50 co-parenting custody. And that's what it's been from the get-go. I trust her entirely with that. And I've also tried to honor that. And, early on in the divorce, when I was traveling with the boys, I wanted to be upfront with her and just telling her specifically, not only in regards to the settlement agreement, right, and honoring what that says, but also in just honoring the fact that she's their mother, right? And saying, I want to take the boys to see my parents. We're going to be gone from X date to X date. I will send you the travel itinerary once it's confirmed. And I did that, and it all followed through. But I think those are the things that you have to do if you want that healthy relationship, if simply for the sake of just your children to begin with, right? That's the first inner circle that should matter. I think the other outer circles that matter are what happens in the rest of your life. I was talking about this with my therapist, which is actually that when I think about how I want this whole thing to develop, I would love it if there were some point in my life, whatever it looks like, if I'm married again, and that person has kids, I don't know, right? But what that looks like if we have a blended family. And I imagine Tamar is still around somewhere because the boys still have her as a mother. And what does that look like? What is that? I would love the opportunity for it to be a really type of wholesome thing, right? A very type of hallmark thing that makes you want to punch your friend in the face, that sort of thing. It's so kind of beautiful. It's disgusting, right? I want the type of thing where we're all together on a holiday or whatever it is. And this is our happy kind of, blended family sort of thing. We've all got our mishigas, but we're making it work because there's something really important here. And I would love for us all to be as happy as possible in that scenario and to have what we want in that scenario. And I think you need to be able to think about those things. And it's not easy. Shev and I were just talking about this. In the midst of divorce, when you first hear about it, you're too close to the elephant. You're too close to something so big to understand it all. But I think you need to think of it in stages. You need to have a lot of patience. You need to think about maybe what you want it to look like 10, 15 years down the road and how you want it to feel. And if you can get some semblance of that, then it's not so hard to start taking small steps in that way. And that means communicating with your co-parent. It means not using the children as a mechanism or device to get what you want, because that's actually detrimental to the children. And I think it means just, working on your stuff as much as possible so that you can be as fully present in co-parenting as possible.
As you were saying all of this, I was thinking, I wonder if with every divorce with minor children, if it can be discussed and understood that both parents will continue to have relationships with their children freely, I wonder if that wouldn't change a lot about the other aspects of the settlement agreement and at least make dad calm down. And because I think for those divorces where that is an issue, where the first conversations I have are, I'm so scared that I'm not going to be able to see my kids. How do you think about anything else in the settlement? That's your heart you're dealing with, right?
It's survivalist mode. That's what you're in. It's fight or flight. And you're in survivalist mode. You're trying to think about how it works. And you also, this is where self-compassion and self-confidence come in. You could have too much self-confidence and think like there's nothing I absolutely need to worry about here because I've done great at everything that I've done and, I have all the evidence to prove it. But you could be wrong about that. You could be fooling yourself. And maybe what you need is more self-compassion to say, there's some things I need to work on because I am worried about that. Right. And if you think that like the divorce is going to impact your relationship with your children, then while you're going through the divorce is the time to start working on that relationship as much as possible as you can. Right. And even if it means spending a little bit more quality time with your kid, right, just to kind of get it in there. It will help you build up a perspective, which is to say that it's not great, but I'm doing something about it and I'm caring for what needs to be cared for.
As a coach for men, how do you talk with men who have worked so much during the marriage? There are jobs that just have a lot of overtime at different, like police and firemen. Depending on the season, firemen are never home, right? How do you discuss with men whose jobs have taken them away from their children that they need to start maybe thinking about or justifying and explaining they're going to change so that they can address time with their children?
Look, I think this is one of those straight up conversations. I used to work in the South and we had an expression when you needed to have a serious conversation with them, you had a come to Jesus meeting with them. Great expression, come to Jesus.
Yes, so we can all use it, right?
And so there's no question about it. Men are set up in a way to go into this never-ending track of work. I don't think we can take that lightly. I think knowing that the general existential track for men in the world is that you will leave the home and go to the office, right? And that is something that men all over the world are trying to fight back against, but that is the general track. Right, you go out and you find something for your family to bring home. Right, that is what it is, and it's gotten refined in suits and high, in office meetings and all that stuff. But
now we have divorce.
And it causes an opportunity for us to reflect on things, right? And it could be that even though we've been put in this way of needing to go out there and work, right, and spend time away from the family, that there needs to be a recalibrating of that. Because that's a setting someone up for failure scenario, right? If you say like, okay, you can have everything that you want, you can have the kids and you can have the office and the job and the family and the wife and all that stuff, and you can have all those things, and you can give all you possibly can to that, that's a lie. You can't give everything to your office and also everything to your family. And I think part of it is a recalibrating of what's really important. First of all, just in the immediate moment, again, from like the survivalist technique, you have kids there, right? And that shifts your perspective as just a person, right? It means that you have someone to provide for. You have someone, you need to care for them. You really do at the very basis of it. And so that needs to become a shift. And it may mean, a reduction in work hours and taking a step back. Because again, let's say if you went into this endeavor just in terms of life in general, right, and said, yes, I want kids and I want the family and I want the job and I want the big house and all that, you can want all that stuff. But if you can't manage all of it, or if something falls through and you need to do some repair, you need to plug those holes until you can, float on again without, taking on water. You need to be able to handle those things. So if it means stepping back from the office or stepping back from whatever job it is, even if that may hurt in some way, you're still fulfilling very, I would say, manly, and I use that in quotation marks, and masculine responsibilities by caring for the things that need to be cared for in that immediate moment so that survival can occur and so that thriving can also eventually occur again.
So here's the conundrum. I mean, you raised so many good points. Here's the conundrum. We live in Southern California. So until COVID, the entertainment industry was our big industry.
Yeah.
And we have type A personalities who work in the entertainment industry, especially film and television.
Yeah.
And they want to make a ton of money, and
Yeah.
you can't make a ton of money by being at home, generally.
Yeah.
Well, now you can with COVID. But before all of this, you couldn't make a ton of money. You couldn't be seriously successful unless you were out 16 hours a day, right? And so then the family is benefiting from the money if you are successful at what you do. But the trade-off is you don't get to know your kids very well, and you start not knowing your wife if you're the man doing all of this. Okay, so the conundrum is now we have the divorce. And the man realizes, oh, shoot. Well, I may not be able to see my kids as much. What does this do? How am I now going to... I have that work-life balance, right, that you have to deal with. And then you have the wife saying, how are you going to possibly have visitation rights? Because you're always at work. I know you. This is your habit. But the divorce is a game changer.
Yeah.
And here's what I say, and I'd like your take on this too. So what I say to my clients is, get that, but now we have a different situation going forward. And you're not going to be there, Mom, to take care of the kids and have them ready for Dad when he comes home from work. Dad's actually going to have to restructure his life, right?
Yeah.
And you can't punish Dad for it, for doing what he had to do to earn a living, because it really benefited everybody with the private school and the vacations and the clothes and the this and the that, which, of course, in the big house, everybody loves.
Right.
But let's talk to Mom a minute here.
Yeah.
Mom has to accept that there's going to have to be a restructuring if Dad's going to have a relationship with the kids.
Yes. Yeah, and there's going to need to be a way to make it work. If you care for the kids in the process, you've got to be patient all around. You've got to be patient for the kids to come around, and you've also got to be patient for the parties to come around, whether you're the ex that initiated it or the ex that received it. You have to be patient in that process to allow them to go through what they're going to need to go through, whether it is the emotional reconciliation or the logistical reconciliation, the figuring out how it's the needing to find a new place and where is that place in relation to work and how am I going to end up making this go? And then what happens, dear God, if you're divorced and you lose your job?
Oh, shoot.
Right?
Yeah.
And do you have to pay child support? Right? How does that end up shifting? Who pays child support now? What happens to health insurance and things like that? What happens if the job that you get or you get transferred is out of state? Is your ex going to be willing to do some type of custody agreement or something like that with you? Is that something that you can reconcile on your own? I mean, there are any number of different questions that come up that could simply run through your mind in the process of divorce that the other person might not be thinking about at all. And so, like I said, having that patience for them, allowing them to kind of figure things out in their own way possible that works for their life. And then also saying, I need to make some accommodations to this and being flexible to this. I mean, I don't think if you're willing to co-parent, right, and be there for your kids.
You're talking
right?
about men now, right?
I'm talking about men. I'm talking about women.
Okay.
If you're both willing to do it, right, you're also flexible with your own lives. I mean, I've asked my ex before to babysit. There are times where I do a funeral in the middle of the day, right, when I've got the boys, and I ask my ex to babysit. Now, she's also working. She's working from home, right? And when she doesn't have the boys working remotely while they're doing remote school, right, that's a real boon to her. It's a boon to me when I don't have the boys. I can get work done when they're with their mom. Right. But if I need to drop them off in the middle of the day, that impacts her life a lot. Right. And in theory, that's my own crap to deal with. Right. I need to go out there and I need to make that money. I need to take a job in the middle of the day when I have my kids in order to be able to do that. But she's there in order to make it possible. And I've made it possible for her. Right. When she's got work things. And I think having that flexibility, if you're co-parenting with each other, because it makes it work, is overall healthier for everyone. She knows that my going out there and that doing the funeral, right, will bring in money and I'll be able to do things for the boys with it. So she's not going to stand in the way of that because she wants the boys to be healthy and she wants me to be able to work. I'll give her both, right? But my point is that you both have to be flexible on that end. You have to be willing to say, like, even though this is my new life, and trust me, I do it. I listen, right? I like the moments of freedom. I really do, right? And they're great. And I don't want them to be interrupted. And then there are times where it's like, it's not, I have kids. It's always going to be a shared life like that. She will always be their mother. I will always have had that experience with her. She will always have had that experience with me. And even if it is painful now, because there certainly is sorrow and sadness and pain still there.
It comes up.
Right? It happens.
It comes up.
You're human, right? You don't have to be perfect. Your ex doesn't have to be your best friend either, right? That's not what I'm talking about. But you do have to recognize that you're still in each other's lives one way or another. And it can either be painful or it can be healthy.
Absolutely. Well said.
Thank you.
So there's a little aspect about Jewish divorce, at least in the Orthodox side of Judaism, that I would just like for you to share as an added bonus piece of information. It's called the get. And it's just in Orthodox, right? It's not in...
No. I mean, it's different. The Jewish community is broad and varied. You're always going to have multiple approaches to things. Let's get down to it. The marriage at its essence in the most traditional form, despite all the beautiful, lovely trappings that we have today and its spiritual, sanctity that we have today, in essence, it's an agreement between two parties, a contract between them in terms of what they provide for one another, and particularly what the husband provides. A woman was taken as property. She was given a particular value, and the husband needed to make up for that in the ketubah. So he would hand that to her, the legal marriage document. It was a contract that said, this is what you're worth. This is what I owe you in the event of things not working out, right? This is what you're going to get. And it used to be really easy to get a divorce. If the husband just simply didn't like his wife, it says it right there in Deuteronomy. If he finds her unseemly, forget it. She's gone, right? He can get a marriage divorce. And then, sages throughout the years made it much more difficult for him to get a divorce. But then eventually, you needed to get a get. You needed to get something that would actually annul the marriage, that would dissolve it, that would make it no more. And that's the process. You get
Speaking to the religious side of divorce.
Yes, in Orthodox communities. So in very Orthodox communities, certainly. In conservative communities, yes. In Reformed communities, not so much. That's not to say it doesn't have spiritual significance, but the way it goes is like this. If you wanted to get married again in the Jewish tradition, right, civil marriage is one thing. You can get that outside of God's eyes altogether. But if you get married within the guise of your faith, particularly Orthodox or conservative Judaism, you can't be married to another person. We don't do polygamy, okay? So you need to be broken off. Your marriage can't be anymore. You need to be clean slate. You can have kids and everything like that. But the problem is, traditionally speaking, if you were still married to someone else while you got married and you had children with them, then those children's identities would be impacted in some way, right, of an adulterous relationship. And so the get exists so that the marriage can be fully dissolved. So we know on paper that it's legally dissolved. And it would work essentially the same way. A rabbi would write a writ of divorce in the presence of two witnesses, and the husband would hand it to his wife, and that would be it. And they could go their merry ways and do their own things. And then there are, any numbers of scenarios where if the husband wasn't around, people would need to act on behalf of the husband to provide the dissolution of marriage, or else the woman would be considered chained. She would be considered an aguna, and she wouldn't be able to marry anyone else or live freely. She would always be married to her husband. So in the event that the husband doesn't offer the divorce or abide by the divorce in any way, a rabbinic court can step in and annul the marriage on her behalf or on his behalf so that she can live her life.
And you said rabbinic court.
Yes.
So within the Jewish faith, you have your own law tribunal, so to speak, that deals with marriage.
For religious matters, yeah.
Okay, that's very cool.
And I would suggest, if I may, I would suggest that any rabbi who's dealing with a couple, whether they are Reform or Orthodox or secular altogether, that even if a couple is getting a religious divorce, they absolutely need to get the civil divorce, right? Because that matters as well. But all the more so if they're getting a civil divorce, right, they should also get a get. And in the Reformed community, it's not necessarily mandated. In the Reformed community, a civil dissolution of marriage counts In conservative communities, you need to get the get. But I would argue that anyone to get a get can actually have really wonderful spiritual significance in the fact that it's probably a really final letting go of things, right? That like you've broken off all ties and this is just one more, and that can help with closure.
In the eyes of God as opposed to in the eyes of the state of California or the state of whatever.
I don't even necessarily matter about in the eyes of God. Forget about God's eyes. How about in your eyes, right? That it's just one more thing. And if you thought, by the way, that like involving God in it made it permanent, right? You should know that it doesn't. That even God leaves openings for those separations.
I never heard that. Okay, so, but there's another part to this that I learned recently, and that is the woman has to accept the get. So if the man wants to get divorced and offer the get or initiate it, doesn't the woman have to accept it?
Yes and no. I mean, it depends on what's going on. I mean, it depends on what's going on in the obligations of the marriage and who's failing it. What I would encourage anyone who is asking for a divorce to accept the divorce or to at least think very seriously about it. I wouldn't presume to know all the intimate details of what goes into a couple's relationship and why they necessarily go towards divorce.
Right.
But if someone asks for divorce, then there is a moment to sincerely consider what has led you to this. And maybe it is time to move on. And so whether it is the husband asking for the divorce or the wife asking for the divorce, and in Judaism, it's the woman asks for the divorce, but the man has to grant it. Right. Now, that's the traditional perspective of it. I don't think that actually, it may be that like you take time to consider, like what's going on and if this is really where you should go. But in theory, Judaism has a no fault clause already. If you don't want to be married to someone, you can't force them to be married to you. So you get the divorce. If someone asks for it, you give it to them, whether it's the husband or the wife. You can do no contested, but that doesn't really exist because it just is what it is.
I have a million more questions I could ask you, but we are actually at the end of our hour, believe it or not.
Time flies.
It really does. You've been so fascinating. I want people to be able to get in touch with you.
Please.
Please explain how they can.
There are a couple ways. Thank you. Thank you, Judith. My personal email address is noamraucher@gmail.com, NoamRaucher@gmail.com. You can reach out to me with any types of queries or complaints or criticisms, whatever you got. I'm used to taking it. I worked in the Jewish community for many years. It's standard practice.
There's a joke in there. There's a joke.
Somewhere. You can also reach me at the Jewish Divorce Project at gmail.com. You can reach Shefa and I there. You can also reach us at the Jewish Divorce Project at gmail.com. And I think maybe
Did you say Instagram already?
We're on Instagram at the Jewish Divorce Project. We're on Facebook at the Jewish Divorce Project.
And I Googled you, and that was easy. I listened to episodes through Google.
And our episodes are available on Google, on Stitcher, on Spotify, on iTunes. So check us out, folks. Our newest episode is coming out this week. It's going to be Hanukkah resilience. Hanukkah is all about rededication, resilience to things. So how do you find resilience in divorce?
And that's coming up seasonally, right?
That's
at the
exactly
end of December.
right. That's
Very
right.
good.
That's right.
Thank you, Noam. This was an absolute pleasure to have you
so much, Judith.
Join us.
Thank you. I appreciate you letting me be long-winded.
And thank you, everybody, for listening to Constructive Uncoupling, the podcast devoted to amicable divorces. And didn't we learn a lot today? I'm Judith Weigel, your host. You can reach me at Judith@amicableddivorceexpert.com, Judith@amicableddivorceexpert.com, and I look forward to speaking to you next week.